everyone, welcome back to English in 10 with me, Natalie. Today is our third video all about conditional tenses. Today we're going to look at the third conditional. Now, I've already made two other videos about the zero, the first and the second conditional. So I will put a link to those videos in the description. If you haven't seen them yet, then you should pause this video, go back and watch them, and this will make a lot more sense for you, okay? So it's much better if you watch them in order. Okay, now for everybody who has seen those videos, you will remember that in our conditional tenses, we always have two clauses. We have an if clause and a main clause. Now, this is exactly the same in the third conditional, but the difference is that the third conditional is talking about the past and not the present. All right? Before we get started, please, if you enjoy our videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. At the end of this video, if you find it helpful or now, give us a thumbs up, that would be excellent. And if you want to turn on notifications, ding ding, then you'll always be notified when we publish new videos. All right, so let's continue on with our third conditional. I said that the third conditional is talking about the past and not the present. The zero, the first and the second talk about the present, but the third conditional talks about the past. But it's not talking about what actually happened in the past. We use the third conditional to talk about a desire or a wish for something different in the past. We're talking about an imaginary situation that didn't happen in the past, a hypothetical situation that didn't happen in the past. Let's take a look at it in a little bit more detail, and that will help you to understand better. We'll start with looking at this example. If he had got up earlier, he wouldn't have missed his train. If he'd got up earlier, he wouldn't have missed his train. How do we make the third conditional? Well, we have if, then we have the past perfect. So in this case, had got up. And then in the main clause, we have would plus have plus the past participle. In this example, it's negative, so it's would not have missed. So if he'd got up earlier, he wouldn't have missed his train. As in the other conditional tenses, what happens in A directly affects the outcome in B. So if he had got up earlier is what we imagine could have been different. And if that had been different, if that had happened, then the main clause talks about the alternative outcome that we could have had. So when we look at this sentence, what do we know? What do we know? Well, it's if plus the past perfect, and then the second clause is would have missed, well, would not have missed in this case. So we know that it's a third conditional. So what this sentence tells us is that the true past, what really happened, is that he did not get up earlier and he did miss his train. So he did not get up earlier and he did miss his train, but we imagine if he had got up earlier, he wouldn't have missed his train. So we imagine a past that is different to reality. All right, don't worry, we're going to take a look at quite a few more examples. Before we do that, I want to talk about some alternatives as well. In the second clause, you can also see the word might and the word could. We'll keep this example and replace would with might. So if he had got up earlier, he might not have missed his train. What's this mean? Well, it means that it's possible that he would not have missed his train. It's possible that he would not have missed his train, but we shorten it and use might. So he might not have missed his train. Right? So we can replace would with might and make it more about possibility. For could, we'll look at an example that's a positive sentence because it makes it a little easier. So, if the weather had been nice, we could have gone to the park. We've replaced would with could. What do we know about could? This means would have been able to. So we still have the exact same structure. We've just replaced would with could. Could have gone. It's would have been able to. Okay? So you can also use could and might instead of would in the second clause, in the main clause in your third conditional. Okay. Before we move on to our examples, I also want to talk to you about something very, very, very common in English, and I may have already said it without realising, and that is contractions. You know, because you've been learning English, you know that we really love to make things short, as short as possible. Often we write it in a contracted way, and we always speak with contractions. So we'll look at the if section first, and we'll go back to the example of the train. So if he had got up earlier will become if he'd. So he had, we'll shorten it to he'd. If he'd got up earlier. If he'd got up earlier. If he'd got up earlier. We make it very short. Okay. If the subject is a noun, not a pronoun, so if the weather had been nice, we do the same thing. If the weather had been nice will become if the weather'd, if the weather'd, if the weather'd been nice, if the weather had been nice, if the weather had been nice, but we never write it. If you write it, you would always write if the weather had been nice. But when you say it, you would say if the weather had been nice, we would have, etc., etc. Okay? Great. Now, let's look at the second clause in our sentence and how we contract that. The second clause with our train example is he wouldn't have missed his train. Did you hear it? He wouldn't have missed his train. So because it's negative, we have would not, that becomes wouldn't, and that's okay to write, absolutely fine. Wouldn't have missed his train. When I say it, if I say it very naturally, it sounds like this. If he'd got up earlier, he wouldn't have missed his train. He wouldn't have missed his train. If he'd got up earlier, he wouldn't have missed his train. He wouldn't have missed his train. So what I actually do is I take would, not, and have and squash them all together so they sound like one word, wouldn't have. You cannot write that, but it's very, very, very common when people speak to say that. Okay? We always make things shorter. Something else that I just want to let you know, and I'll use a different example to show you this because it will be easier. Let's use the example, if I had known, so if I'd known, I would have gone. So how do we contract would have gone? You can either say I'd have gone, put I would together, or you can put would and have together and make would've, I would've gone. Or you can take I, would, and have and mash them all together and make I'd've. I know, it's horrible for you, but it's okay. It's okay. Once you've heard it quite a few times, it'll sound normal. So I'd have. If I'd known, I'd have gone. If I had known, I would have gone. If I'd known, I'd have gone. I'd have. Or I'd have gone, or I would have gone. I'd have gone, you can write. I would have gone, you can write. I'd have, you can only say it, you can't write it. And that's the end of the contractions. It was a lot longer than you expected, but I just wanted to make sure that you really understood the different ways that we say it. And if you want to sound more native, make it shorter. So now we can go on and have a look at some examples of the third conditional. All right, now for these examples, I'm going to say them how I would say them. Okay? I'm not going to say them more slowly. I'm not going to say every word because that's not how we talk. But they will be on the screen so you can read them in case you can't quite catch what I say. And I'll see each one a couple of times. Right? Good. Number 1. If you told me we were going somewhere fancy for dinner, I'd have worn something nicer. If you told me we were going somewhere fancy for dinner, I'd have worn something nicer. So the reality is, he didn't tell me we were going somewhere nice for dinner, and I wore my tracksuit. And I say, if you told me we were going somewhere fancy for dinner, I'd have worn something nicer. So I'm imagining what I would have done in the past if I had known we were going somewhere fancy. Number 2, if I'd had time, I'd have gone to the supermarket on my way home. If I'd had time, I'd have gone to the supermarket on my way home. So the reality is, I didn't have time, I didn't go to the supermarket. Fact. But if I'd had time, I would have gone to the supermarket on my way home. Number 3. If I'd been born as a boy, my parents would have called me Rory. If I'd been born a boy, my parents would have called me Rory. So I was definitely born a girl. My parents called me Natalie. So if I had been born a boy, my parents would have called me Rory. Last one. If the shop had been open later, I would have stopped and got us dessert. If the shop had been open later, I would have stopped and got us dessert. The shop shut early, So I didn't stop, I didn't buy dessert. But if the shop had been open later, I would have stopped and got dessert. Okay, great. That's the end of our third conditional examples. I hope that that's made it a lot clearer for you and that you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. If you have any suggestions of videos that you would like, things that you're finding difficult, please also let us know and we can try and help you with that. And that's us for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely morning or afternoon wherever you are. Bye.